what was the sin sacrifice for the ruler who sinned? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Leviticus on Walking Through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Leviticus chapter 4. We're going to be reading from verses 22 to 26. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Leviticus chapter 4, beginning at verse 22. When a ruler has sinned and done something unintentionally against any of the commandments of the Lord his God, in anything which should not be done and is guilty, or if his sin which he has committed comes to his knowledge, he shall bring as his offering a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. And he shall lay his hands on the head of the goat and kill it at the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. The priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour its blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering. And he shall burn all its fat on the altar like the fat of the sacrifice of the peace offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven him. In the last two episodes, we have discussed the sin sacrifice that was to be offered when the priest sinned and when the whole congregation sinned. In both cases, a young bull without blemish was to be taken and killed before the door of the tabernacle of meeting. The attending priest would then take some of the blood of the bull and go into the tabernacle and dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it before the veil of the sanctuary 7 times. He would also place some of the blood on the horns of the altar of incense. The rest of the blood was to be poured out before the altar of burnt offering. As for the bull itself, all of the internal fat portions were to be removed, just like in the peace offering, and burned on the altar. Whatever was left of the bull, including its dung, was to be taken outside the camp and burned. That the bull was going to be completely burned, allowing nothing of it to be used, showed Israel the seriousness of sins, which should have prevented them from wanting to sin. We now come to the third category of the sin sacrifice, which was the sin of the ruler. A ruler could be one who is leading the people in any capacity. Moses was ruler of the people. Joshua was ruler of the people. Any of the kings would be rulers of the people. What this section seems to be talking about is personal sins of these people. For if the ruler led the whole congregation into sin, then the sacrifice that needed to be offered was dealt with in verses 13 to 21. Again, we find that these sacrifices were for unintentional sins, not ones committed in complete knowledge of and in deliberate rebellion to the laws of God. It was to be offered when knowledge of the sin came to him. The phrase in verse 23, or if his sin which he has committed comes to his knowledge, is a poor translation. In actuality, it should read something like, and when his sin comes to his knowledge. The reason is because earlier in the chapter, it is quite clear that sacrifice for sin wasn't required until the knowledge of it came to the one who sinned. Sometimes that will occur immediately, but other times it will take time because the sin was committed in ignorance. Now, like we said in the last episode, it's not that the sin wasn't a sin until the knowledge of it came to light, else one should want to remain ignorant of everything, but that the sacrifice for sin wasn't required until the knowledge of the sin came to light. If God had expected otherwise, then all of Israel would have spent their entire day offering sin sacrifices just in case they had sinned. God was gracious, though, and only required the sacrifice when they knew they'd sinned. Other translations make this phrase much more clear and fix this poor translation. Unlike the last two sin sacrifices, though, this one is slightly different. The first difference that we see is the animal that was required, an offering of the kid of the goats, a male without blemish. Is this because the sins committed by these rulers are less significant than the priests or the congregation? No, for all sin is sin before God. But the priests knew the law and so shouldn't have broken it, thus requiring a more expensive sacrifice. The congregation itself should have had men who would have prevented the entire nation going off into sin, and so a more expensive sacrifice was required. However, an individual, like this ruler, might be more likely to not know the law of God completely and break it without knowing it. So a different scale of sacrifice was required. What is the same, though, is that none of these sacrifices could remit sin. Only the blood of Christ could do that. They could, however, sanctify for the purifying of the flesh, with the one offering it being able to go away knowing they did what God commanded and trusting that God would forgive them of their sins. The goat was to be killed by the one who sinned in the place where the goats were offered the burnt offering, which according to chapter 1 was on the north side of the altar of burnt offering before the Lord. The priest wouldn't take the blood of this animal into the tabernacle, though, and sprinkle some of it before the veil and place some of it on the horns of the altar of incense. Though we're not told why here, in chapter 6, a hint for this might be given as to why this was. Instead, some of the blood was sprinkled on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, with the rest being poured at the base. The internal fat portions of the goat were to be burned like that of the peace offering. We're not told what would happen to the rest of the animal here, but we will find out when we get to chapter 6. This sacrifice, when offered properly, would make the atonement for the sins of the transgressor because of the death of Christ. We'll conclude the chapter, the Lord willing, in the next episode. With that, our time is up today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Leviticus chapter 4, verses 27 to 35, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.